Welcome back, climbers, to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC, the first ever car podcast episode that we've ever done. I am joined with my son, Ashton Guerra. Thank you for joining us, son. We are driving on our way to go see a basketball game, and my son came up with this great idea of doing a podcast episode in the car. So I'm sure there's some special, cool name that you can call for it. Car casting or something, whatever, but I'm not that cool. But Ashton, how long have you been working for us now?
Going on to 4 months.
4 months. So fresh off the boat for understanding how CMMC and all these types of things work. So we thought, you thought it'd be kind of cool to let you ask various questions so that you can try to level your knowledge about CMMC up, and thought we would just record it and do an episode about it. So I'll let you kind of take the reins, and I'll start answering any questions you got.
Yep. My first question to you would be, as someone new into IT and CMMC in general, what do you think led you to become a CMMC company?
Yeah. First off, I think not knowing exactly what I was getting myself into, would I do it again? The answer is yes. But the part of the challenge was, as I was seeing managed service providers like us, they were offshoring a lot of stuff. They were trying to figure out how they could do more with less for cheaper. And it created this kind of race to the bottom of quality and price that just I wasn't comfortable with. We have a great staff of people that that wasn't something that I wanted to do. And I just thought, how can I find some type of arena, some type of need that is going to require a high level of compliance and competency and focus. And then when I saw the news that hit from the CMMC 1.0 to 2.0 transition, that made a lot of waves as the DoD made that transition. That's when it popped up on my radar, and I saw, what is this they're talking about? And I started digging into more about what CMMC was, and I was like, that's the thing. That's what I want to do. I want to take our company into doing that. And I decided right then that I wanted to do it with absolute focus. So some of the other companies that are managed service providers like us, they'll do consulting engagements or project stuff for people that just need to sort of help. And I was like, no, what we're going to do is try to figure out how to be laser focused in providing really kind of one set of services, and that is taking somebody that has nothing and moving them to ready for compliance, and we be their help desk, that we be their full-fledged IT support staff. Because these small companies are going to need that. They're going to need someone to take them from start to finish, and then obviously some of the CMMC requirements are you have to have that maintenance continued, right? So just getting them to 110 is at the finish line. That's just the first battle in a long war of continuing that compliance. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to build a company that's what we were going to do. We were going to focus on that. We weren't going to do consulting, where we were going to try to become a C3PO and an MSP and a whole bunch of other things. That's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And we're just going to be the best darn version of that as we can possibly be. And that's what we've been, laser focused on that for years now, just focusing on how we can do it, how we can do it efficiently, how can we do it at scale, how can we work with clients. And, this year is, we've already hit just 1 year of the actual certification process really happening. And this has just been it's so cool because it's like an undiscovered country, because this is all new for everybody. There's only a handful of MSPs that are doing this. And it's just fascinating because I started the company back in 2002, and there's only so much to managed services that hasn't already. You can attend a peer group. There's all kinds of books that are written about it. It's very well documented about how to run a good managed service provider. Lots and lots of peer groups you can join. Different methodologies of the math of how you run it. nobody has anything like that for CMMC.
Another good question I would have would be, if you were an MSP getting into this space now, would you go about it the same way you are now, or would you tweak something to your plans?
Oh yeah, I would definitely do it different. Yeah, that's a good question.
Which way would you change it to expose your new plan?
Yeah, well, I mean, I tend to be a person that learns by doing it wrong the first time, through that, because I want to. It's not that I'm instinctively always picking the wrong path, but I want to try to make sure I understand the path that I'm picking is the right way. And the only way you can do that is by pushing the envelope in areas that might be right or wrong. And you have to kind of go down those paths and determine, is this a dead end, or is this the path, the next choice that you have to make? And when we started going through that journey, we did a podcast about the 5 levels of grief, right? I'm not sure if you heard that one, but Kaylee did a good job of kind of coming up and working through it. We went through it. And I had to go through those 5 levels of grief, of understanding. Like when I first tried to do CMMC, I tried to think about how I could do it with the least amount of commitment, right? It's like trying to get in a relationship, and you're like, how little can I be involved in this relationship and still make it work? Like, that's the worst kind of relationship to start off with. Like, you have to be like, I'm going to start this relationship with all in, right? And if I would say that would probably be the number one thing that I would do different, was I would have started with the all in mentality, and we would have been so much further down the path than we are now, because I would have committed 100%. I would have set the money aside. I would have bring in the people. I would have focused on the training. I would have, done all these things right off the bat that would have been expensive. They would have been scary. They would have been total commitment. But I think that's really, if you're an MSP and you're really thinking about trying to get involved in CMMC, don't be half pregnant. Like, you got to go all in, and you got to get 100% committed, right? It's a powerful, imagery there. But yeah, I mean, like, you've got to 100% commit. And that's how I would say the number one thing. And then I would have probably spent more time in understanding the controls and the systems and the processes, I think, more before I tried to do documentation and build some of the processes, because I think I threw our SSP out 3 times going through it, because I didn't fully understand the controls well enough that as you go through them and you start to understand, you're like, well, that's wrong. And then you're like, okay, let me rewrite that. And like, okay, well, now that I look at this whole architecture is not going to work. And then you kind of throw that out. And then, it's just, your waste bin just gets full and full and full. And I mean, to some extent, you'll never be able to avoid that in your journey. That's always going to happen. But I think we could have been further along had I just had more wisdom of really that commitment. But it would take somebody a lot of trust and foresight to be able to know to do that, right? Your first instinct is always to kind of protect and shield and try not to commit to that level. But as a CEO of a company, committing to that level is pretty scary. Even companies that are much larger than us, 20, 30, 50, $100 million. And when I go to talk to them about how they're trying to get in the space, they're still even trying to limit their exposure of how they want to commit. And that's just, there's no way you're going to be successful doing it that way. In my opinion, I've not seen it be successful yet. How about that?
What about different ways you might help clients with CMMC? Would you change any services you might provide, or if you had a perfect world?
Yeah, I would have. It'd be cool if I could time travel some of the vendors that are now available that are cloud-based. Nothing with CMMC is none of the letters for CMMC stand for cheap or fast. So you can't do it fast and you can't do it cheap. And those are countercultural a lot of times for what clients are looking. Can I do it cheap and can I do it fast? The answer is no, you can't. You can do some parts of it fast, but it's not going to be cheap. And sometimes you can do it cheap, but it's not going to be fast. So you can't really have both of those at the same time. And when you're working with clients and you're trying to move them through the process, you want to try to pick the best path for them that they're going to pass, trying to understand that you're not necessarily always going to have the assessor you're looking for that's going to fully understand, necessarily your perspective. So you want to make sure that you pick a path that's going to give the best chance for the client to pass. And that's important when you're moving them through the process, because what you don't want to do is realize that you've painted them into a corner and you've made a mistake. And now you're like, crap, now we got to backtrack and figure out how you do this. And so when we were early on moving through, some of the challenges around how they were going to handle FedRAMP and how that was going to go, how they were going to determine the types of data like security protection data, were they going to classify that as CUI quality level and require FedRAMP requirement for that type of data? So for example, if you had like a SIM tool, like the log gathering, the way that the proposed rule was written, it made you start to think that if that type of data would maybe have to require FedRAMP. And so then some of the tools that you might have used or could have used weren't available. And so there's this ambiguity that you didn't know as people were coming in for a landing about landing the plane. They're like, I've got to make sure that when I land it, it's going to work no matter what. So you had to then try to pick the safest path. And it took different products and different options off the table as we were helping clients a year and a half, 2 years ago through the journey off the table. Well, 2020's hindsight. Now we have the hindsight view. We know how they were going to do it. We know that they didn't look at it exactly the same, and there were some options that you could explore. And so, there are more cloud solutions and tools. Some of the cloud vendors that we have, like, for example, Huntress is now on the table to be used because of some of the changes they made. Ninja One is now FedRAMP ready, or not ready, but authorized. And so now we can use them. And so we've started pulling them in. But those weren't available 2 years ago. So, but if I could take all of that and move that back in time, I would start to try to use more of those cloud solutions, because then you can leverage those tools and capabilities that they have. It's great if they have FedRAMP, because then you can straight inherit what they've got.
You mean like use them earlier on?
Yeah, I would have loved to have been able to use them. And so you can lean on their FedRAMP portions for the inheritance of some of the pieces, because using a remote management tool those things are super powerful. And so I would never use an RMM tool that wasn't FedRAMPed, because you've got to be able to make sure that you have a good solid base to build off of as you're doing stuff. And so now we're going down that path of moving us and then our clients through that, but it takes time to get them through that. And that's what gets kind of frustrating for me sometimes when I go to like some of these conferences and you walk the floor with the vendors, and it's like the vendors don't seem to understand that even if you wanted to use one of their products, they almost act like you just plug it in and it's ready to go. Like you got to go through the validation process, the documentation, the training of your staff, validating it's going to work, looking at it from the different angles. Like you can't just plug that thing in and just assume it's going to work. So every choice has to be very carefully analyzed to know that it's going to have the right outcome that you're looking for, because it takes so long to get it rolled out and implemented because of the way CMMC has the change control process and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so for me, like trying to use more of those cloud solutions that are good, solid, and heritable, having those available early on would have been just so great. I would have liked that more. And there's more products and vendors that are coming out that are going to make this journey that much easier for everybody. But right now, I feel like we've kind of gone from like no fire that exists to kind of, so we're coming out of the Stone Age to now we have wheels, right? And we're kind of coming into possibly more of like the industrial age with some of these tools and solutions that are coming out. And it's going to get better over time. But I would say that was like some of the biggest changes that I would do.
So for someone that hasn't been in the space for too long or know too much about, different updates on things like that are FedRAMP now, what's a good resource or a good way to find these vendors that are coming up with this new stuff, or just solid stuff that they can use now?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Is there a list for them?
There is sadly not. I would say that I'll go to the different CMMC conferences, and I would say half the vendors, like, I wouldn't even talk to. Which sounds like really mean, but like, I don't like their approach. I don't feel that they are going to provide you with the best option. So I wouldn't go with them. If you're new in the space and you're trying to figure that out, you don't have the experience to know that or have the preference to choose left over right. So what would be the next option? The next option would be start getting to the conferences, start getting to know people in the industry, try to make those contacts with people that you're like, I think they're doing it right. So what are you doing? And then take notes, and then try to talk to someone else and find out how they're doing it. And then start building kind of a list. Like, if you're just one person who's working for a company to try to start doing CMMC, like, you have no chance of knowing that. So then try to convince them to let you go to a conference. If not, then get on Reddit and drop some questions there and start building at least some type of crowdsourcing information to give you a better idea of what's out there and get an idea if it's capable. And then the last thing I would do is get a CMMC certified assessor that's gone through it, or a CCP that's gone through it, someone that's been in the industry, that's gotten certified, that knows what they're doing, and try to. And what would be great is if they've worked with various different companies and they can give you a good idea of what they've seen that has passed, right? Not we've helped try these different things, but actually pass, because that's where the proof's in the pudding, right? There's lots of people you can talk to that'll take your money and promise you a lot, but getting across the finish line with a successful 110 and a level 2 certification, that's different. And that's what would be the bar I would decide on when you're trying to go through. So I'd go to the conferences, try to talk with qualified people in the industry, get in some peer groups and other things to try to talk with what they're doing, and that'll give you the best chance of success.
For somebody struggling to get their company to buy in, whether it's just an employee helping with CMMC or, the owner itself, but they're kind of iffy on whether or not they want to buy in, what's the best way to realize that and then start that process?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And you can look through Reddit and you'll just see every other day people posting that are dealing with that exact same challenge. And it's so frustrating because these are people that are in the trenches trying to figure out how to get it done, and they're not sure if they can, and if they're trying to just swim upstream with the current they can't overcome. And getting the leadership buy-in is the most significant and important way to be successful. I've seen companies that have had lots of money, they've thrown lots of money in it, but their leadership and organizational processes will just wreck it and not make it successful. So the word of advice I would take is try to understand what makes upper leadership understand that they have to fully commit. And typically the driving force there is the hopper that they have to keep going of the sales process. And they don't think about when that hopper is dry, it's just a matter of time before the bank account goes right behind it, right? You've got to keep the sales pipeline going, and you've got to think about that. You've got to think about that sales pipeline, and it takes time to win those contracts. And then once you win the contracts, you got to go through the award, and then you got to go through the process of ramping up to meet it. Well, it takes you 8 months, a year plus to get CMMC level 2 certified. And that's if you have a company that's fully committed. So if you are waiting for that hopper to get empty, to then kind of go, yeah, I think now's the time we need to start doing this because these contracts are requiring it, then you're too late. You're going to have this massive gap in your potential to do contracts. We've already seen people run into that, where I've had companies that have dragged their feet in the sales process, and they're like, hey, management just realized they are not going to be able to, if they win this bid, they're not going to be able to take it because they don't have a level 2. They're already starting to see that happen with contracts, and they're like, what do we do? And they're like, well, do you have a time machine? Can you go back in time when we originally talked to you 8 months ago? If you would have said yes then, you'd be a lot better off, but you didn't. So it's a little hard for me to make something happen there. So just helping them understand that this type of decision has an 8-month to a year consequence. You need to think about it now is the first challenge that you have to do. And the second challenge is that it's going to be at least $100, $250 to $500,000 to pull it off, because you've got to commit that much money and time, effort, and some way to get it. And there's no way that you can not slice that bread that way, because you either have to pay someone as a consultant to come and do it, or you're going to have to pay someone that has the knowledge to be employed for you and do it, or you have to do a hybrid of that. But either way, you're paying it, and then you've got to pay the money for the assessment, and the assessments are going, $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 plus if you bring a consultant in to do it. So that the dollars add up really, really fast, and you can't do what you've always done and pass. That's like the next thing that you have to really wrap your head around, because if you were able to do what you've always done and still pass, then they wouldn't have had people have to go through it in the first place. So you need to wrap your head around as a leader that you're going to have to change as an organization. And if you can't wrap your head around how you have to change as an organization, then you probably shouldn't do it. Because I've seen people come into our sales pipeline, and you're like, here's the stuff that's going to happen. I don't think that's true. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, I can't really help you with that. And so trying to be very realistic with them about, look, here's what CMMC is about. We're going to have to change how we operate. Well, I don't want to change. That's not a good sign. You need to understand that you have to go through change. Well, and it's going to cost money. I don't want to spend money. You're going to have to understand, like, they're going to have to come to that term. And if they won't, then I would do it. Like, you just have to draw the line, because there's just no way for that to happen. You can't fit 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. Like, there's a reason why it's a 5-pound bag. So, and there's a reason why those things are the way they are. It's just physics. And so you can't cheat that. And so those types of things have to play out. And so trying to map those out in a way when you're talking to them can be challenging for someone that doesn't, if they're just a technical person and they're not operational, then they can't talk the right language to them to make them realize that. So if you come at them from the operational perspective, a lot of times you'll get a much better return on your time, because just explaining to them how difficult it is technology-wise, explaining to them how this might fail or there, like it tends to fall on deaf ears. You kind of have to go at it operationally to be successful, usually when it comes to the leadership.
I will say, being able to sit in on Kaylee doing sales calls, you can see how explaining operational-wise what we do and how we function, and then them being able to see that it really is more about the partnership and not just taking the client on. So kind of doing it how you're explaining, it really makes it so much easier to determine whether or not it's going to work or not. And, if you're going through CMMC and you haven't realized things you might need to adjust or not, being able to adjust to that is going to help you in the future. Having seen the little amount that I have, you will have to adjust. And, us having gone through level 2, we're adjusting every single day.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff, the stuff I hear is, it's constant. So, I guess just for me, I just put that out there because the little bit that I've seen already, if you're going through that, you have to be able to adjust and also take feedback.
Right.
If not, it's going to be really rough, and you're going to be calling back later.
Right. And I think a lot of times people that they're more technical and they were going to management's used to hearing what they want to hear and getting the results they want to do by just digging in, and you have to just equally stare them down and be like, here's the reality. You're going to have to change. It's going to be significant. It's going to cost money. We're going to need the involvement of consultants, or you're going to need to send me to get educated. Hard stop. That's the facts. If you don't believe me, then we just wait until you do, because I can't move forward in any other way, because it's just madness. Like, you just can't do that. And I think when you start to build that resolve and confidence, when you approach leadership with absolute, stalwart belief that that's how it is, and you bring some of those facts and talk about what those realities are, and you can back them up with podcast episodes like this to talk about people who have done it and seen it. Okay, don't use us, use whoever you want, or do it yourself, but you can't do it in a vacuum with no knowledge. You're going to have to invest in somebody in your team and your organization and get them up to the level so they can get you, because these controls and technologies are so difficult to do. You have to have the knowledge to know how to do it. It's like, okay, either I go hire a surgeon or I train somebody internally to be a surgeon, but they're not cutting on me until they have the knowledge they need to. But it's crazy to think about how so many business owners are like, you'll figure it out on the job training, just start cutting. You're like, well, how many scars do you want to have? I'd like to have one if I can help it. And then just be focused. But they're just handing scalpels to people left and right, and it's just crazy. But that's not how they look at it. But if you really approach at it operationally, that sometimes you can maybe bring the horse to water.
Another question I would have would be, so we talked about before this a little bit, but for a company that's bigger and maybe a little bit harder to go through the whole process of CMMC, you mentioned an enclave.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different types of things you can do with the client to maybe make it easier to go through the whole process, or
it really, one of the challenges that we run into, which might be surprising and might not, when we're to go to talk to the client, is they don't know what they're asking. Right? They're like, I need this certificate, help me. So I can win bids. What do I need? They don't even know what they need. It's kind of like, I have this thing that I need to take somewhere, and it's big, and I need to get it from here to over there. So you need a truck. You're like, oh, that's it. That's what I need. I need a truck. You're like, okay, so how much stuff do you need to put in the truck? I'm not really sure. So then you've got to kind of walk them through the process of understanding sort of what they need. And it can be very, very challenging of trying to get them to that point. But the more you get used to doing that, the more you start helping them better define what they need. And then at that point, then you can start really starting putting more of a pen to paper about how you would want to design that solution. And usually it falls into various different kind of categories. You mentioned an enclave, and the concept of an enclave is separation, right? Separation from your normal operational duties. And that can really save you some bacon if you happen to be in a fortunate situation where you can do that. And how it's helpful is if you think of CUI like nuclear radioactive material, you're like, I don't want to run that through my whole building. Is there a way that I can make it to where I can keep it in a certain area, and then I don't have as much risk around dealing with that? And that's where the enclave starts to come into like really focus, is if you can start to keep your CUI in certain areas and don't expose it to the whole company and less machines and workstations environment, then it's much easier to build a small little environment, right? If all I have to do is defend a small room, I can do that, with a lot less resources. But if you got to defend a whole real estate area, now you got a lot more fences and a lot more areas you have to defend. And it's the same thing with CUI. Like, the larger your area gets, the more complicated and expensive it starts to become. So determine if you can isolate it. If you can, and you can get away with an enclave and a cloud solution, we use 365 purely is how we go. So we go with either GCC or GCC High. There's lots of people that do it in Google as well as Amazon. So, and you can accomplish it there as well. But you want to kind of keep it in that environment, that cloud environment, and then you can limit your exposure. It's great if you can keep it pure cloud, because then you don't even have to have a local site visit for assessment, because then they're just assessing this cloud solution and that's it. Then you can really cut down on your footprint, and the ramp up time for your assessment. All of that is just smaller, so smaller costs, smaller build time. It's much quicker. But maybe you're doing manufacturing and you can't. And so you don't have that. So you might have to go with like a more physical. And maybe with the way you operate, you can't really isolate it into smaller spots. So you have to include all of the areas. Well, now you're going to have a much larger impact to your operational way of working, because your operations are going to have to change to match CMMC. Everybody's going to have multi-factor. You're going to have a change control process. There has to be a process when you go to authorize users. You can't just say, hey, we're letting them in tomorrow. Like, well, have you done a background check? Have you gone through and done the appropriate training before you allow them out? No, well, then you can't get in. What do you mean I can't get in? He's starting tomorrow. He's not starting in the tent. I can tell you that. Like you can't just blow your foot off because you feel like that's what you need to do. Like, you've got to stick to those types of things. And companies that don't have the maturity of knowing how to change, they can't accept that, and that can be really challenging for them. So having that cloud enclave can limit your blast radius of that required change of them experiencing it. But sometimes you don't have that choice. You're going to have to do a large chunk, if not all of your environment you've got. And if that's the case, then working that through with leadership and helping them understand it. A lot of times sitting down with leadership and the decision makers and having conversations about how they operate and how the CUI moves through their environment, and talking about the types of controls they're going to feel, like change control, access control, the physical boundary protections and those types of things, media protection, printing, those types of real serious heavy hitters, they can start wrapping their heads around how that might impact their operational process. And then you've got, so then you can kind of walk through, like, what would their day in the life look like if they changed to this environment, and they can start understanding how it's going to be. And then the next one is kind of the hybrid between the two. Like, maybe maybe they can't go cloud because of the way they work, but they don't have servers, and they may not even have an office. They might be a fully remote working environment, but they don't print or have any type of physical, but as far as in like physical media, but they have lots of physical laptops and devices. So we typically call that like a hybrid, and those are easier to set up because you don't have the physical components of dealing with the CUI being out of the environment. And if you tighten down the restrictions on those laptops, you can draw the boundary on those. And a lot of C3POs are okay with that. Not all of them are, but as long as you've aligned it correctly, the controls, you can prove that you're managing the firewalls appropriately and controlling the access, you can do that successfully, and it's not as costly. So it sort of falls in those three buckets, and then knowing how those buckets work and operate. There's obviously exclusions and variations and versions of all of that, but they tend to fall in those three categories. And then understanding how that works and working clients through each of those can be helpful. And we've had situations where we've had clients that we start off to do them in the cloud, but they're a startup company and they're taking off. And then by the time you start to move through it, they've grown so fast that maybe they're going to have to be a hybrid or maybe a physical environment. Sometimes clients can make it very interesting.
So piggybacking off of that, what would be the big differences for the assessments depending on their type? Yeah,
the pure enclaves are, assessors, like the last one we did for a client. It was a pure enclave. The assessors like literally shouted for joy when we were talking with the lead assessor. Like, yeah, this is how it's going to be. It's a pure enclave play. And they're like, oh yes, I love those because they're typically much easier to assess. And they, assessors love it because it's a typically, if it's well done, it's a smooth sail through those because you're limiting your exposure and difficulty of how you do them. But they're still challenging. I mean, you got to make sure you got all your P's and Q's taken care of because you got 320 assessment objectives, of which some, may be inherited by your cloud provider you're using, but you've got to be ready to defend yourself about all of those, right? So it's no cakewalk by any imagination, but it is a much straighter shot. And so those, a lot of times people think of phase 2, which is the part where they gather the evidence and actually assess the controls. Those on a pure cloud, you see them happen in 2 to 3 days if they're well designed. But then when you go with like a hybrid environment, most everybody's working remote home, so you still won't have a physical assessment if you do it right. But now you've got the laptops, a lot more laptops and pieces that have to be assessed. But still, it should be if you're not bringing CUI out of that environment, it should still be a pretty straight shot, very similar to the pure cloud enclave. But then when you have the physical environment involved, if they don't have servers or things of that nature, if it's just workstations in the cloud play, it won't be as bad to go through to do it. But then sometimes there's clients you have that have operational technologies, like they're doing manufacturing, and so you got to look at it, and they have certain devices that were running Windows NT, which was created back in 1995 and 94, 93. These are like very ancient equipment. You can't handle them like you normally would anything else. So those would be like specialized assets and how you would have to work with them. There's a lot of complexity about that. So the assessors are going to have to understand what's going on before they'll pass you. So, you're getting a full 5 days plus a site visit on stuff like that, possibly. So it's the level of difficulty goes up when you go to do that, and understanding that is helpful.
So if you have a site visit for a physical assessment, would you have to go to it or have an engineer go out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it's really up to the MSP and how they engage with their client. The physical aspect is pretty much always going to be the responsibility of the client, and the reason why is they own it, right? They own the door control system. I don't have a team that's looking at the door control, making sure the right people are coming in, right? I'm not issuing keys. They're doing it. The client's doing that. So that's the whole PE domain, the physical environment, is going to be the client. So they're going to have to own it. They're going to have to speak to it, and they need to be prepared to defend how they did it. Now, the implementer or the MSP that's doing it needs to be able to work with them and help them be prepared to defend themselves. So think of it almost like a court trial, right? You're going to have a deposition where you're going to talk to the attorney. Well, your attorney should be like, all right, let me sit down with you and we're going to go through how this deposition is going to look so you can be prepared to defend yourself and not say something you shouldn't during the trial or the deposition, because it'll go really bad then. And we do that, and anyone should do that when they're helping them get ready for the physical environment. Now, they may choose to have somebody like from the consulting or someone like us be there as a representative to help work through it. But this is where you get into the shared responsibility matrix or the customer responsibility matrix, where it says who's responsible. Well, if the matrix that they showed the assessor says it's their job, then they're on the hook to defend and share how they do that, right? And so some assessors might be like, look, you're on the hook for this, so you're going to have to talk about it and defend it. The MSP can't talk about it because they're not the ones doing it. You're the one doing it. So you have to be prepared to defend that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So domains that require those physical boundaries like that, they're going to get they need to be prepared, even if they have a consultant, to defend themselves on those.
Off of that, what do you think the best way for someone that isn't our client and maybe doesn't get that type of treatment before an assessment, what do you think the best way for somebody to get ready for an assessment would be?
Yeah, that's a good, important question that a lot of times, sadly, they find out too late. Is that if you've done it yourself and you've not had anyone outside of your business or organization who has done assessments before assess you, you're going to fail unless you're just the smartest people on the planet and happen to just be a genius at how you read the controls and have done it before. You have no chance, because it's hard to describe. It's just human nature to build that echo chamber where you believe your own belief about how things are, but it rarely lines up with the reality of what the assessor is going to see. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? That means I highly recommend you find someone that has actually done assessments for a C3PO or a consultant that's moved people through it, and pay to have them do at least an assessment. They could even check a subset of the controls. They don't have to do all of it. You could just have them check the critical ones, like, AC. I mean, they're all critical, but, just go through some of the more difficult ones like AC, CM, IA. Those are some tough ones to get through. AU, so the auditing, making sure you're auditing or working the right way. Those are things a lot of times people fail. Just the first 8 controls in the AC family are very tough to get through because it requires so much connectivity to so many things. And so you can just have a very qualified assessor come through and check those, and then it will be a slap in the face of a wake-up call of helping you understand where you're at. And it'll also let them kind of look at your system security plan. If they sit down, they're like, your system security plan's like 8 pages. It's written on Post-it notes. That's not going to pass. They're going to go through and help you get some good reality checks. And here's the cool thing is it won't cost that much in the grand scheme. And they might charge you $3, $5, $6 grand, $7 grand to go through and do at least partials or sub assessments, because it's one assessor usually that they'll use versus going through a full assessment where they might have to use, they're going to have to use by regulation, 3 certified assessors in order for you to do it through a C3PAO that's going to happen like normal. So because of that, that's why the cost is so high, because you have to have all these higher paid and quality people doing these assessments. And because of that, they take longer and it costs more. But if you go through a mock and you're not going to use them in your assessment, like they're not going to try to be your assessment company, they can even give you consulting and provide valuable insight about what you got wrong. But it's important that you check that when you get the deliverable by whoever does your assessment, like that they need to give you a causality as well as suggestive resolutions if you don't want them to do your assessment too, because then that really helps tie it all together. You failed 3-1-1 because you didn't have a good validation process and authorization process in alpha, and here's an example of how you could do it with a template. So they could provide you not only why you failed it, but here's some suggestions on how you could do it. When they cross that threshold, though, they can't be your assessment body. They can't assess you, because then they're consulting and assessing, and they can't do both.
What would be a good way to find like a good C3PAO
that's a good one
to consult with?
Well, if you want them to consult you, first off, making sure right off the bat that they understand that's what you're looking for. You're like, I want you to consult me. So right off the bat, they might say, well, no, we don't do that anymore. Because go back in time, right? So let's say pre-2024 of December, C3POs weren't allowed to do assessments. They weren't authorized to do them yet because the rule hadn't come out to let them do it. So the way that they made a living was doing mock assessments or by consulting. So a lot of C3POs did consulting because that's how they paid the bills. Mm-hmm. But now that assessments are officially happening, a lot of them have switched over to just doing only assessments, and they won't do consulting anymore. So asking that question off the break kind of will help weed it out quickly, mm-hmm. right? Then once you're like explaining to them, I need you to do consulting, they might say yes or no. The other thing is, I would want to ask how many assessments they've done and how many they've had pass and what their clientele that they've had. Now, they can't tell you who they were, but like the types of clientele that they've had. A lot of times they'll be willing to answer that. You know, if they've only done 4 or 5 assessments in the year, and all the assessments they've done have been different types of clients that aren't you're like, you know, maybe that might not be necessarily a great fit for you. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's about knowing the types of assessors they're going to have, what they're going to be assessing. Obviously, you want to find out about the price. And then also you want to find out about how they handle a lot of different things. Like if you fail control, what are you allowed to do? Mm-hmm. And just trying to understand their approach to stuff. They can't consult you, but you can ask questions about how they would handle things. And then also talk to people that have passed, that have gone through it, and ask, who did you use? What was your experience? What assessors did you use that were with you? Did you like how they approached and handled stuff? And those are helpful. And you kind of start putting that together, then you can kind of try to start boiling down your C3PO options to the ones that you feel are good. And then, like, if you go to a conference that they have, like, there's usually like 20 there, so you can actually talk to them in person, and that's helpful too.
Another thing we talked about earlier too was if you were to ever fail, say you went through the whole process first time and you never got consulting on it, it looked good but then crashed and burned. What do you think the best process would be after that?
Yeah, we've had numerous people come to us that have had that happen, which is really sad. And what sometimes during that process, part of what we're doing is just trying to talk with them and make them feel a little better about what they just had happen, because it hurts to have that, to go through all that effort, cost, time. But then the next thing you need to do is like, okay, are we still going to charge this hill? What do we need to change in order for us to get to the hill? Because if you try to do the same thing you did before that didn't get you there, what's the result going to be? Probably not getting there again, right? So you're going to want to think about what you need to change. And it might be that who was helping you get there is who you might need to change. It might be that leadership needs to change in their approach and understand that they have to maybe pay more money. Maybe they have to make more concessions about what they're going to change in their environment. Those are the types of things that might have to happen. It could be a combination of all of those. But I think coming at it with fresh eyes and the belief that change will have to happen somewhere and without finger pointing is the best chance of making that happen. And that's going to provide the best chance of getting you finally standing on the podium holding that certificate going, we did it, we passed. But going at it, we've had companies come to us, their MSP wasn't prepared, they crashed and burned, like you said, during the assessment. They knew as they were going in it was probably not going to go well, but at this point there was no going back. They'd already kind of locked in on it. Experienced that bad situation, and then now they're going through with us to go through the change. But one of the things that I think is people unwisely kind of assume is, oh, well, I'm going to go to this other MSP or this other consultant, and they'll just be able to use what I have. Mm-hmm. Normally, that's not the case. There might be some organizations that are willing to do that, but if you think about it, it's almost madness. Like, you don't have a battle plan that someone else wrote that you now have to try to think about creating and adopting to your group that's never tried to to actually implement that. So if you're going to be switching to another MSP, chances are they're going to throw out most everything that you already had, because they have to do it the way that they've designed their team to work and operate. And that could be a bit of a shock for people when they're trying to look at swapping to another provider, another solution. If that's something you don't want to do, chances are you won't be able to swap to another MSP. You might have to swap to like a consultant that can come in and just work with what you've got and build it further, if that's what you want to do. But if that's the case, if the way that you wrote most of your controls are the expecting that an MSP is going to support you, it's going to be almost impossible to find another MSP to magically appear and fill those dotted lines. That there isn't a person standing there. Like every MSP is different to some extent, and they're not going to fill those perfectly. So that's where it starts to become more challenging, and having just an MSP that swaps out and says, oh, you guys are using Sentinel? We'll use it too then, it's fine. We've only worked with Defender, but we'll use Sentinel now. Or, we are used to using Sentinel, but you use ESET. Fine, we'll go with that. Like even just using different products can be challenging for their support team. So most MSPs that have stepped into the space of CMMC and really, really get it won't do that. They'll be like, we have qualified our team and how they operate, and we must operate this way because this is how we're ready to support you for the many, many years to come. And so that's why it's really hard to find an MSP that just swaps out and operates the same way you did. That's why in situations like that, sometimes they'll use like consultants or people like that.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, Ashton, thank you so much for helping us go through, I guess, the questions you had and going through. It was fun going through and asking with him. It's also just fun having my son with me to go through and ask questions. And I'm just thrilled that you're on our team now. I was just so happy to have an opportunity to have you come work with me. So now I got my daughter working with me. I got my daughter-in-law working with me. I got my son-in-law working with me. And I got my son now working with me. So, yeah, man, it's like we're turning this into a family.
Yeah, taking over CMMC.
Yeah, that's right. We're taking it by storm. I love it. So, everybody, I appreciate you joining us on this journey, literally as we're driving. And as always, try to follow us on LinkedIn. If you have a platform you're listening to that you can rate us, please give us 5 stars. We appreciate it. It helps other people get to know us better. Forward our information to anyone that you think might find this podcast helpful. And then also hit like and subscribe. Those are also great benefits to us. And then come check out our website. We have our events page where we're going to be at different conferences. We'd love to see you in the hallway. Say hi to us. We'll talk your ear off about CMMC all day, every day. But if we don't see you at a conference, hopefully we'll see you in the next episode. And as always, keep on climbing. Bye for now.